to start that there.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Lara. My name's Chris. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Chris.
So the baseball card stats, my sobriety date is June 27th of 2019. I have a home group. I have a service position in that home group, and I have a sponsor. He knows he's my sponsor because we talk all the time. I see him, and we continue to do work together. And then I also get the privilege and the opportunity of being able to sponsor other men in the program. And I mention all that stuff because that's what keeps me sober. That's what I had done since the start. I've done, did some of that stuff since the start, but, service, the home group, and having a sponsor, those are all important things to my recovery. So yeah, I guess, where do I start? I'll qualify myself. I, like a lot of other alcoholics, I first tried substances when I was 12, 13 years old. I was 7th grade, and my brother, actually, he was the one who got me into it because he was, he's kind of a bully, the older brother, and he was like, you better do this with me, otherwise you're going to narc me out. And, and then we'll both get in trouble if you do it with me. So I'm like, all right, well, and then he's like, I'll beat you up if you don't do this with me. I'm like, okay, fine. And I really enjoyed it. I loved it. I don't know if I would say like, oh, I found my spot, like this is what I want all the time, but I was like, this is awesome. I had a great time. This is so much fun. I'm going to try to do this as much as I can, if that's like, I found it, I made it, then maybe, but I just, I liked it. I had fun. And the first time I drank alcohol, we had to steal it from the store, and my buddies runs out with a 24 pack out of nowhere, and he jumps in. He's like, "Go, man, go, go!" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So we take off, and we got this 24 pack, and he's like, "All right, we're getting drunk tonight." I'm like, "Well, I've never had a beer in my life." He's like, "All right, well, cool." So so we stole this beer and got drunk and got in this huge fight. Like 3-4 of us got in this huge brawl, and it was awesome. I loved it. It was such a great time. And like that's how like I drank like that. I drank and we got wild, we got crazy. It seemed like I always had something to prove. And maybe it was like the younger brother, older brother mentality. Like I was always trying to keep up with him and trying to keep up, with people who are older than me. And it's just, I drank like I had something to prove, and I did everything like I had something to prove, and where I grew up, it wasn't like a small town per se, but we were pretty isolated. And I grew up in Sammamish on the east side, and, so big sports and, sports and, alcohol and drug community out there. There wasn't a lot to do. So, we did what we could. And yeah, I mean, the stealing, the drinking, the fighting, the, going to school hungover, the skipping class, going and, playing sports, and then really pushing everything else aside to get loaded. Like that was the mission was, skip as much school as I possibly could so that they wouldn't actually call my mom that day and like tell her that I'd skipped too many classes. It's like I could skip like 1/3 of the classes I had for a day before they'd call. And then, so I was trying to do like juggle that. And then, eventually like my junior year, I flunked out, and I took off, and, things got really bad, and I moved out, and told everybody that, oh yeah, she kicked me out. And so like, that was my first time of, crashing on a friend's couch and, getting a job because I had to, and, like just being broke and miserable all the time. And, start of senior year, I called her and I said, hey, can I move back home? I promise I'm going to go back to school. And so I went back to school, and I went right back to the same stuff, doing all the same stuff again. And just like that followed me into being an adult, and finally on my 21st birthday, I got to drink legally for the first time. And it was on. And so I went out and I had, went to these bars, and I blacked out completely, and I woke up in King County Jail. And no idea how I got there. Just absolutely out of my mind. And I was like in a cell with like an orange jumpsuit, and everyone was in street clothes, and I had no idea what was. I'm like, what am I, like the loony guy here? And and I unzip my little thing, this jumpsuit thing, and my coat, like my clothes are covered in blood, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what. And so I'm terrified. I'm a 21-year-old kid, and I had no idea what's going on. And the story unfolded through the night or through the next few months of talking to some people who were there. And yeah, I mean, it's like I got drunk, I got in a fight, I fought with the cops, they took me to jail. I was way too wild in there, so they had to take me to King County. And that's like, I was drinking like I had something to prove, I was fighting like I fight, and I had no idea how the night was going to turn out. And what's crazy to me too is, like, I could have a night where I would go out and I would have a beer or two with dinner, and then I go home and I'd be fine. I could go out and I could, go to a friend's place who's throwing a party, have a few drinks, and then, be fine. Or I could go out and I could, drink and wind up in jail, and um, it's just how it was. And so I knew something had to change, when I was in my 20s, and I started having a bunch of health issues. And so, like, I tried to stop on my own, but it just didn't work. And then, like, I eventually got really sick and went to the hospital, and they told me, oh, you have like gallstones and like sludge and stones in your gallbladder. How much do you drink? Like, oh, maybe a few beers a week. And they're like, are you sure it's not more? I'm like, no, definitely not. And they obviously knew what was going on. They said, you're like a 50-plus-year-old alcoholic woman, like with your gallbladder. This typically happens to like older ladies, and not, this is the doctor, the ER doctor. He's like, we need to get you in for surgery, and we need you in today. So they like immediately, removed my gallbladder, and they said, okay, well, you can't really drink anymore because you're not going to process alcohol, and you're not going to process certain types of foods, and all this stuff. And so, yeah, of course I went home and I started drinking again. That's like any good alcoholic would. And I got super sick. I got so sick, and then I'm like, well, I don't know what that was all about. That's really weird. So I tried drinking again, and I got sick again, and I'm like, oh, I must have something must be going on. And so, like, I talked to my doctor, and I'm like, yeah, I just can't stop throwing up. And he's like, well, how much are you drinking? I'm like, I'm not at all. So I'd like talked this poor man into like giving me a bunch of like painkillers and stuff, and all these other like pharmaceuticals. And I'm like, oh, this is legal. It's my doctor. I'm taking it as prescribed. And it's like, he didn't prescribe me to take, 2 Percocets and then drink a half a fifth of whiskey. Like, he's said, take this and rest when you're in pain. And like, well, I was always in pain, so of course I was always doing something. And and that, like, I eventually did have to stop because I was getting really sick, and I kept going back and I kept going back, and and they caught on, and they were like, you need help. And like at no point did I think like, oh, maybe I should go to get a treatment center or any of this. They did. They were like, you probably use an inpatient treatment center. And I'm like, I'm way too busy for that. I'll do this. I'll take care of this on my own. Yeah. And like, I didn't do it. I didn't go into this treatment center. I didn't, take the help when it was offered. I just, soldiered on and sucked it up. And then I went into this maintenance thing for a while where I knew I couldn't drink heavy. So I stopped like drinking with this like purpose of getting loaded in and so like I quit. I just started smoking weed every day for, the next 10 years straight, and only occasionally drinking, and like only occasionally like, doing some other outside stuff, a few times a year, and started building a life up for myself, and really like putting some stuff together. And, like it's Chris said, I got the job, I got the car, I got the house, it's a condo. I moved out to Kirkland. I had a real job, and, starting to, meet a gal, and we were talking about marriage. She moved in, her and her daughter moved in with me, and like my life was getting better, but I just had never really stopped. I'd never really tried to do anything different, and it kind of all caught back up to me again. And she was drinking, and she wasn't an alcoholic like me, or so I thought. Turns out, like, actually pretty recently that we got in touch for the first time since before I got sober. And first thing she said was, "Wow, you're alive. I can't believe it." And then the other thing was, "Wow, you're in AA. That's the only way you were going to ever survive this thing." And then she said, "I am too." So that was pretty cool. Like, hearing about somebody in my past, because our relationship was really bad, and it was the alcohol and getting loaded together was not a life that is sustainable. So yeah, so we had our falling out, and I went and I rented a moving truck for her, and I moved all her stuff out one day, and I'm like, what a nice guy I am. Look at all this stuff I just did for you. And so I'm like, she's like, "Well, where are me and my daughter gonna go?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but all your stuff's in the truck, and you better take off." So yeah, so I threw her out, and pretty yeah, pretty messed up way. And thankfully we talked about it and we reconciled over that, and I was able to make amends and all that for that. But yeah, I mean, that's when I went right back to it. And like, I was finally free. I was finally free to do whatever I wanted. And that was it. Like, I was working this contract for a corporation out in Redmond, and I was doing really well. And then some ego stuff happened, and they like sold the contract to another company. They were going to pay me less, and I'm like, "I'm out of here. I'm going to quit, and then I'm going to find another job." And I didn't. I went 5 years without working a real job. And a lot of that, that was the alcoholism. That was me putting the stuff first in front of my own life. It became paramount for me to be loaded all the time, from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep or finally crashed out. No matter how much time. Once I started, I didn't stop until it was physically removed from me. And like, all my stuff went away. All my relationships went away first. All my stuff went away. And then all my money went away. And then the home went away. And like, all of a sudden I was facing homelessness. And my mom said, "I'll help you out if you go to this treatment center, and we'll put you in there, and we'll get you in and get you going and on the right track." And so I'm sitting in this like intake place with her, and uh, I'm like falling asleep, and it's been like crazy few days, and she's elbowing me awake. Finish the paperwork. And I snapped on her, and I'm like, quit beating me up. And so I made like this huge scene in this intake place, and I took off. And she's like, "I won't help you out if you leave." And I'm like, "All right, that's fine." Yeah, and I went and got loaded because that was the priority. And so then she's like, "All right, well, you got to move out. You're gonna foreclose on this place." And she actually helped me out. I signed a power of attorney to her, and she sold the place, and she kept all the money. And she's like, "You're gonna kill yourself if I give you this money." And so yeah, and she was right. So that started, really started like the last part of my drive before I got sober. And it took about a year and a half of me being homeless, in and out of jail, stealing as a way of life, stealing just to get by, just to eat, just to scrape together money for a hotel, or to maybe like bring something to a friend's place where I could crash on the couch. And like, that was my life. And then that eventually stopped when I was dating this poor gal. She, God bless her, but she was dating an alcoholic, and I was using her, and then she ended up being homeless. So we had a car. I'm like, "All right, sweet, we got a car now." So we're not sleeping on the street, and we're sleeping in the car. And then my best friend stole her car, and we never got it back. So like, you know, the best friend I had in the whole world, him and his girlfriend stole her car and stole our home and all our stuff. So that's basically how my last little bit of that story ends there. And I got arrested one last time, and I wasn't even planning on getting sober. I just was so tired and I was so done. I knew it was at the end, and I was so out of my mind. I didn't even know that like I'd been stealing again, and they were like, "Don't run." I'm like, "I didn't do anything wrong." And it's like, yeah, that's right, you didn't. And so they slapped me with a whole bunch of theft charges, and I had to go through the ringer and probation, all this stuff. And it wasn't my first time. I'd been on probation for a couple years at that point already. It took me 4 years to complete a 2-year probation. So because I needed a little extra help. But yeah, that was when, I was in jail, and I was like, I need to do something different. And they actually had a meeting. They said, "Do you want to go to an AA meeting this week? Sign up for this AA meeting." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll get out of here for an hour and, go from this one little room to this other little room and, hear what these people have to say." And I went in there, and they were talking about how I felt. They were telling my story. They were, one guy was like, "Yeah, I spent my 40th birthday in prison, and I was going to meetings. I got sober in prison." So I was like, "Well, maybe I'll go back next week." And so I went back. Every week that I was there, I went back to this meeting, and I heard these people talk, and I was just so inspired. Like, that like you came in here for free to not like nobody paid you, nobody's like pressuring you. Like, what do you get out of it? What's the goal? Like, what's the trade-off? And they're like, "Well, I get to stay sober." I'm like, "Yeah, but there's got to be more, right?" Like, that's it. There's, every time I'm sober, I'm miserable. That 10 years of sobriety, it was like, I was so miserable. I went from alcoholic to rageaholic, and that's just how I was. I didn't know like that there was a different way, a better way. They're talking about these miracles, and we see miracles all the time. And at that point, I was like, I could use a miracle. So they gave me a book. I still have that book to this day, a big book. And I use it. I read with my sponsees with it. But yeah, I called my mom, and I said, I need help. And she's always been in my corner, and she's always been there for me. And she said, "All right, I'll call your brother. Some people in AA and who might be able to put you in a sober house." And immediately I'm like, "Oh, AA, no, I don't want to go to AA. I don't think that's for me." So they're like, "Well, just go to the sober house, and then figure it out from there." And so I moved into this sober house. I had $7 from the money on this little debit card, because she put it on my book so I could get some like chips and stuff while I was in there, some commissary. So I had $7 to my name, and some dirty, stinky clothes, and that's all I had when I got sober. I got sober at 36 years old, and I moved into this sober house, and everybody there was doing meetings. They were doing sponsorship. They were doing all this stuff. And I had a huge mountain of work ahead of me. I had the probation, I had the court, I had probation in 3 cities, I had court in 4 cities, I had, all these things against me. And I moved to Renton. And so I had King County downtown, I had Bothell, I had Kirkland, and then I had to go to Redmond for like community court. And I had to do all this stuff, some of it weekly and some of it monthly. So I'm trying to like figure this out with this bus. I got a bus card, and, I'm riding the bus for hours a day, every day, just to like get to these appointments. And it was so hard. And I didn't think I could do it. And one of my housemates was like, "Hey, let's get you a secretary of this meeting." So they signed me up for this like Friday night meeting, and I was able to like be the secretary for that for a while, up until like the start of COVID. And during that time, I was like, "Oh man, well, what happens when I get loaded? What happens when I go back out? Do I call them and tell them like, hey, I'm going back out, or hey, I'm out, or like how does this work? And do I just not show up?" And so I'm like, this is way too complicated. Maybe I should just stay sober. I don't know what else to do. So, so I stayed sober. I stayed sober for a while. I didn't get to work right away, but I did get a service position right away. And I was always at that meeting hall, and I was always looking for a way to help because I needed to be there. Otherwise, I'd be back out on the street. And, they helped me. They really, cleaning up, doing yard work, cleaning the place, moving the chairs, cleaning the furniture, mopping the floors, sweeping the parking lot, cleaning up the cigarette butts outside, anything I could do, making the coffee, getting the supplies. I did all that. And so, that was the start of things. And then finally, my mom was actually paying my rent there, and I like wasn't working. And she's like, you either get a job or you can move into this like basement studio. And so I wasn't quite ready. And so I moved into this like basement studio in one of her houses. So, at 37, I moved into my mom's basement. So, that was cool. But yeah, it was, it was an opportunity. And yeah, I worked the steps all the way up to step 9. I made 2 amends, one to my brother, one to my mom. And then I got a job, like my first job in sobriety, like first real W-2, actually paying taxes in 5 years. And yeah, and I thought I was amazing. My ego took right back over, and I'm like I'm dating girls, and I'm, feeling myself. And so COVID hit. Yeah, so it's like there's like a little bit of that excuse. I didn't go right into the online meetings right away, and yeah, I immediately got miserable again. And so and I was actually out doing a work trip, helping out in Atlanta for this work stuff that I had to do. And they were drinking and smoking, and the guy's like handing me, he holds this joint out. He's like, "You want some?" And like staring at this thing, and it's like it's pulling me in. I'm getting like vertigo staring at this thing. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I snap out of it. I'm like, no, I can't do that. And I immediately left, went back to my hotel room, found an online Zoom meeting, and just got right back to it. My sponsor that I had worked the steps with, I hadn't called him in months, and I went on this meeting, and it was, I went to another meeting, and then I went to another Friday night meeting, and it was my home group, the Hot Stove. It was their online meeting. And that's where that night I confessed to everything that had happened. And this guy named Jeff, he was like, "Hey, you want to get to work? We'll get back to work." And, but there's some requirements. And I called him, and he, call me every day for 30 days. I'd never had that. We need to meet. If we're not meeting, then, then we're not going to meet, and I'm not going to chase you. I'm not going to do it. Like he, gave me the hard line, and I needed that. Because I thought my sobriety was enough, and, I was resting on my laurels, and it wasn't. And so we got back to work, and we did the steps, and I did it with, more passion than I had done them before. And, he's still my sponsor to this day. We continue to do the work. But yeah, I mean, that was the start of it. And he said, you need to sponsor other guys. I had kind of like dabbled with like a little bit of the online sponsorship with the guy, but like I got one guy who never really called me, and I'm like, yeah, I got a sponsee, so I'm good, right? Like, he did what I was doing with my other sponsor, and I wasn't calling him, I wasn't connected, I wasn't doing work. And so that's the type of sponsorship that I was giving to this poor kid. And yeah, I mean, I get, like I said, I got back to work, and I really, I stuck it out with him, and then, started working with other guys. We reopened our meeting. So I was, helping to put those, do those meetings, and getting into service, getting into district service, but like really extending myself, going to a bunch of meetings, like getting sober in my community, building a fellowship around me. And that part of that book that says, nothing will ensure our permanent sobriety so much as, intensive work with another alcoholic. It says permanent sobriety right there. And like a guy like me, like I need permanent sobriety. I can't go back to that, because that cycle of misery that always happens every time I drink is something that, it's waiting for me. I don't have another option. There's nothing left. And I don't know. I mean, I hear people say like, "Oh, this is the last house on the block. This is the," and it's like what seemed like the last stop, like really was like, it was like the on-ramp to the freeway of my life. What I thought was, the flimsy reed that turned out to be the loving hand of God. This was like the last rickety house that I didn't want to go to. And, it's that AA stuff. And, my life had changed so much more than I ever expected it to. And like, you know, I, they said too, like when you get here, like make a list of all the things that you want, and you'll be amazed at, at the difference in your life. And, like the cash and prizes and stuff. That's cool. That's great. I mean, everyone wants to get a good job, and they want to, find the right person, and they want to build this life again, but like all that stuff, I could imagine all that. What I couldn't imagine was like having love for myself, loving other people with, without any ask of them, showing up in a relationship the way I want to be, and the person that I want to be with. I'm not keeping some secret tally like, oh, I did this for you, so you've got to do this for me. Like these transactional relationships that I had for my whole life, that, it's just like having this love for other people. And, that's the stuff that I couldn't imagine that I get to have today. And, I, my life continues to grow, my life continues to change. And, there's some ebbs and flows, like, it's, things aren't always great all the time. And, I've dealt with some bit of adversity, but, building that fellowship and like really doing this stuff with, the people around me, I've been able to walk through this stuff, um, and not even feel like it's a big deal, and it's like that, like you do something really hard and you look back on it and you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. It's like the drinking. I look back on some of that stuff. I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad, right? It was just like a little bit of homelessness. It was just a year and a half, I can look back on like some of these things in sobriety and say like, it really wasn't bad. Like I had people with me. I had my brothers with me in the program, and I got to do this stuff, and I got to stay sober through it. And like, yeah, I just, thank God for the good sponsorship and the continuous work, because, like if it wasn't for that, I don't know, I'm bored. I think I'm too smart, and that like we go through this book and then, okay, what now? That's just one book. And like, I got to do more, I'm a needy alcoholic. I need to do more work. I need to keep growing, and I need to keep learning. And so I get to have that with my sponsor. And yeah, and like I said, I get to carry this message to other guys in the program. And then like that's like the circle gets complete. I get to work with another guy. I get to see his life change. I get to see his life grow. And somebody told me that too, like early on. They were like, oh, once you finish that, you get to sponsor other guys. And that's where it's really, that's like the coolest part of all. And, I was still selfish. I'm like, no, the coolest part of all is me getting sober, and like, how could it be cooler than this? This is the coolest thing I've done in years. And, and it's true. I mean, like getting out of self, getting to, give freely of myself with no request or, no, nothing. I don't know. And it's like, I feel like, it's almost like ego driven talking about that, but it's not, because it's so important to me, to be able to have that. And because it's such a stark difference from what it was before. And yeah, I don't know, that's the miracle. Sponsorship, service work, home group, and working with sponsees. Yeah, it's worked out pretty good so far. So all right, thank you.
Thank you.